people say, oh, Americans have been told to eat less fat. We're fatter than ever. Low fat is dead. It's all sugar. But we may have been told to eat less fat, but I went to the U.S. Department of Agriculture database because they keep track of the entire food supply, not what people say they're eating, but what they're actually eating. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes there's a big discrepancy. And what we found is that in every decade since 1950, we may have been told to eat less fat, but we're eating a lot more fat, 67% more fat, more sugar, more meat, and more calories.
More of everything.
More of everything. So not surprisingly, we're fat, not because we're eating too little fat, but because we're eating too much of everything.
Yeah, so the idea is that it's not that the low-fat thing didn't work, it's that people didn't actually do it.
And the other thing is, besides eating more fat, is people, when they did replace fat, they would replace it with sugar. So you have the Snackwell cookies and, the Entenmann's cakes and things like that, and that's not a good choice.
Right.
But I think if you actually look at all of the data, there's more evidence than ever that an optimal diet is low in fat and low in sugar. It's predominantly fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, soy products in their natural forms. And we've been doing studies for 40 years, so having been in all these different diet wars and diet debates, I said, look, I'm done. Mm-hmm. We've done, every study that we've done has shown that these same lifestyle changes can reverse heart disease. We're able to show that for the first time. Type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity. We're doing the first randomized trial now to see if we can actually reverse Alzheimer's disease. We found that when you change your lifestyle, it changes your genes, hundreds of genes, over 500 genes in 3 months, turning on the good genes, turning off the bad genes in just 3 months. We found that in a study we published that with Craig Venter, who first decoded the human genome.
Right.
We did a study with Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomeres, the ends of our chromosomes that regulate how long we live. We've showed for the first time that in just 3 months, we can increase telomerase, the enzyme that repairs and lengthens telomeres, by 30%. And over a 5-year period, we showed again for the first time we can actually lengthen telomeres, in a sense reversing aging at a cellular level. So the more diseases we study and the more underlying mechanisms we look at, the more reasons we have to explain why these simple changes are so powerful and how quickly people can get better.
What do you think that the challenges are that you face in trying to communicate this message? Because if you canvass the conversations that are occurring right now, they do tend to swirl around this, new obsession with eating a high-fat diet, and everything you ever heard about saturated fat is wrong, and people are all about keto, and there's always a new thing coming, right? A new craze, a new trend. This is something you've been immersed in this for 40 years at this point,
yeah.
and your message really hasn't changed from these studies that you did so long ago to date. I mean, they just sort of continue to confirm what you've been saying all along.
Well, it may seem new, but it's not new. I mean, I've been hearing this for 40 years. It actually goes back to the 1800s. It's really just it's an Atkins diet redux, whether it's an Atkins diet, a paleo diet, a ketogenic diet. It's all the same thing. And first of all, telling people what they want to hear is always a good way to sell books or magazines or newspapers or whatever. And those media have been so disruptive, they're always looking for the next thing that they can hook readers with. Mm-hmm. Number two is that the studies are showing quite clearly that, you can lose weight on these diets because most people do eat too many refined carbs. And so eating fewer refined carbs, you're going to lose weight. And Atkins and I agreed on that. It's what you replace them with. And I'd love to be able to tell people that, steak and burgers and so on are good for you, but they're not. And if you actually look at the idea is to lose weight in ways that enhance your health rather than mortgage it. Mm-hmm. And there was a study in the New England Journal of Medicine that Stephen Smith published a few years ago that showed actually pictures of what happens on different diets, what happens in your arteries. I mean, you can lose weight with chemotherapy, or right. Smoking cigarettes, or lots of ways of losing weight that aren't really good for you. Amphetamines are a good way of losing weight. And what they found is that on a whole foods plant-based diet, your arteries are clean. On a typical standard American diet, which has the great acronym of SAD, they're partially clogged. And on a high-fat, high-animal protein diet, whether you call it an Atkins or keto or paleo diet, they're severely clogged. And even if their weight and even if their blood pressure may be lower, because these often work through what are called non-traditional risk factors, things that people, the little white blood cells that nibble your arteries and keep them clean and so on. And it's not even just about over long periods of time, even a single meal that's high in fat and cholesterol can reduce blood flow to your brain, can reduce blood flow to your heart. There's, the movie that James Cameron and Luis Hoyos and others did, Game Changers, which will be coming out soon, has this great scene with 3 athletes, and they give them a plant-based meal, and then they measure how the frequency and the hardness of their erections at night.
Right.
And then they give them a meat-based meal the next night and found did the same thing. And they found they had 300 to 500% more frequent erections on a plant-based meal than a meat-based meal, and 10 to 15% harder erections. In fact, I'm told the film crew became vegan after shooting that scene.
Yeah, that will definitely get guys' attention, right?
Because it takes it away from this fear-based approach, like, oh, I can't do what I want, am I going to live longer, is it just going to seem longer, all those kind of cliches, to say, oh, these things are so much more dynamic than we once realized, that when you eat this way, your brain gets more blood flow. You can actually grow so many new brain neurons in just a few weeks. Your brain gets bigger, and particularly those parts of your brain like the hippocampus that control memory, that you want to get bigger. When people get older, they say, like, where did I leave my keys, and what was that person's name? A lot of that's reversible. Your skin gets more blood, so you don't age as quickly. Your heart gets more blood. We found you can reverse heart disease. Your sexual organs get more blood flow. And when people realize that it's not just about living longer, it's about feeling better and improving the quality of life, it really reframes that debate from, fear of dying, which is not sustainable, to joy of living and feeling good and pleasure, which really are.
Right. There seems to be a lot of confusion out there right now about saturated fat and cholesterol. For years, the scientific nutrition consensus was that saturated fat was bad, high LDL is bad. And then suddenly some studies came out that caught the attention of the media. And there were a lot of headlines and a lot of articles written about this idea that everything you ever heard about saturated fat is wrong. Cholesterol is something that we need and it's good, and you shouldn't worry about saturated fat, that actually saturated fat is a health food. So Can you walk me through how we got to this point and perhaps clarify the record or share your perspective on this?
I remember I was in Davos at the World Economic Forum 2.5 years ago when Time Magazine put a stick of butter on their cover.
Butter is back.
Yeah, and Nancy Gibbs was the editor-in-chief at the time, and she was doing this one-on-one interview with me, and she said, "So what do you think of our cover?" And I said, "Well, not so well." And she said, "Well, why not?" I said, "Well, because it's not true. The studies are showing that saturated fat doubles your risk of Alzheimer's disease. For every one pat of butter, your risk of premature death from all causes, when you look at 300,000 people in the Harvard Physicians and Harvard Nurses Health Study, goes up by 5%. So these things really are important. Now, cholesterol is good in the sense that your body needs cholesterol. It's a building block for, sex hormones and nerve coverings and all kinds of things. And precisely because it's so important, your body will make all the cholesterol it needs. The dietary requirement for cholesterol is 0. But getting all this extra cholesterol is, we found in our studies that there was a dose-response relationship between the intake of dietary cholesterol and dietary fat and changes in the blockage in the arteries. This was also found in what was called the CLASS study that David Blankenhorn did at USC many years ago. It was one of the first studies to show that the drugs could actually cholesterol-lowering drugs could reverse heart disease. And he found that the same dose-response relationship, the more fat you consumed, including saturated fat, and especially saturated fat, the more clogged your arteries become. Mm-hmm. And even a single meal, as we've been talking about, makes a difference. So, I'd love to be able to tell people that fat is good, that it's all sugar, but it's not. An optimal diet is low in both. Now, the third aspect is animal protein, which people, this whole fat versus carbs debate, I want to make sure that we cover animal protein because there's more and more evidence coming out showing that animal protein is inflammatory. It causes chronic inflammation, it causes oxidative stress, and independent of its effect on, the fat versus carbs. One study came out that showed that people who ate a lot of animal protein had a 75% increased risk of premature death from all causes and a 400 to 500% increased risk of premature death from type 2 diabetes and prostate, breast, and colon cancer. So, again, people like to simplify things and it's all one thing. It's not one thing. It's all these things. And it's not even just diet, but it's all these other lifestyle factors as well.